In the quiet corridors of antiquity, long before the clamor of modern cities and the hum of daily life, desire moved as silently and insistently as the wind through olive groves and across marble temples. The ancient Greeks and Romans, civilizations renowned for their art, philosophy, and conquest, also cultivated a world of private longing, intimate indulgence, and erotic subtlety, a world largely hidden from the public gaze, yet meticulously chronicled in whispers, inscriptions, letters, and poetry. The lives of their citizens, both illustrious and anonymous, were threaded with acts of intimacy that ranged from the sacred to the scandalous, from the fleeting gaze across a banquet hall to lifelong bonds forged in mentorship and erotic companionship. Desire in these societies was never simple. It was entwined with power, education, politics, and ritual, shaped by social hierarchy yet expressed in profoundly personal ways. Among Greek philosophers, poets, and generals, the attraction to youth and beauty was often celebrated as both aesthetic and moral cultivation. In Rome, the private indulgences of the elite could sway public perception, influence political alliances, and ignite scandal. In these worlds, homoerotic desire existed not only as pleasure but as an instrument of cultural sophistication, a vehicle for mentorship, and a silent force in the corridors of power. The marble statues, frescoed walls, and delicate mosaics that survive tell stories as compelling as any written record. They capture the gaze of the youthful beloved, the careful posture of intimacy, and the subtle gestures that transform simple interactions into acts of profound meaning. Behind every banquet, every bath, every secluded garden, desire wove itself into ritual and routine, observed by the participants with both mindfulness and pleasure. Yet for every act of intimacy preserved in art or text, there were countless more hidden from view, silent whispers, fleeting touches, and secret alliances whose echoes we can only imagine. Homoeroticism in the ancient world was also inseparable from social negotiation. The younger companion, often a pupil, apprentice, or favored youth, learned to navigate the intricate dance of beauty, intellect, and social expectation. The older patron, a philosopher, statesman, or soldier, exercised guidance, cultivated aesthetic sensibility, and wielded influence subtly through desire itself. Every interaction carried layers of meaning, pleasure intertwined with instruction, observation tempered by discretion, and intimacy shaped by hierarchy. Scandal hovered always at the edge, an invisible consequence of visibility, a reminder that even the most private indulgences could ripple outward into public perception. Poets and satirists, historians and philosophers, all recorded fragments of these lives, leaving us tantalizing glimpses of a world where pleasure, politics, and aesthetics coexisted. The stories preserved are often shocking in their honesty, unnerving in their subtlety, and meditative in their reflection on the human condition. They reveal a society acutely aware of both the power and the peril of erotic desire, in which scandal, beauty, and intimacy were threads woven into the fabric of public and private life alike. This narrative, drawn from the faint whispers of history, invites us to enter that hidden world. To listen to it is to traverse marble streets and shadowed atria, to witness gestures of intimacy beneath the eyes of gods and ancestors, and to understand that desire, especially homoerotic desire, was as much about cultural education, aesthetic refinement, and social negotiation as it was about pleasure. Across centuries, this delicate interplay of mentorship, longing, scandal, and artistry shaped lives in ways both visible and invisible, leaving a legacy that continues to resonate in memory and imagination. As night falls over the ancient city, the air is thick with the invisible traces of longing. The statues seem to watch, the mosaics whisper, and the frescoes speak of pleasures and transgressions, mentorship and affection, scandal and secrecy. It is a world at once intimate and public, ephemeral and enduring, where homoerotic desire flows like a hidden river beneath the currents of social life, shaping art, politics, and the very consciousness of civilization. In this space, we begin our journey, through whispered scandals, private indulgences, and the enduring cultural legacy of desire in the classical world of Greeks and Romans. The ancient world was alive not only with the rhythms of war, politics, and philosophy, but also with a more subtle, intimate current, the secret lives of those who loved, observed, and desired one another in ways that society both structured and policed. These currents of intimacy, often homoerotic in nature, flowed quietly yet persistently beneath the surface of public life. They shaped behavior, dictated social hierarchies, and influenced cultural expression, leaving traces that are both tantalizingly incomplete and hauntingly vivid in the records that survive. To follow them is to enter a world where the private and public, the aesthetic and erotic, the moral and political, are intricately entwined. In Greece, the interplay of desire and education was central to civic life. The mentorship of youth, a practice enshrined in literature, philosophy, and social custom, was at once a cultivation of intellect and an awakening of erotic sensibility. Poets like Anacreon and philosophers such as Plato observed and theorized the forms of love, celebrating the beauty of youth, the intimacy of mentorship, and the refinement of character through shared intellectual and physical experiences. Love and desire were inseparable from learning, ethics, and social duty. To observe a young companion, to instruct and to guide, was also to witness beauty, cultivate virtue, and participate in a silent ritual of both aesthetic and personal formation. Rome, in turn, inherited and adapted these Greek ideals, but it placed them within a framework of social hierarchy, political influence, and public consequence. A Roman patron's favor could elevate the status of a young companion, transform a personal relationship into political advantage, or even provoke scandal if the boundaries of discretion were breached. Pleasure was never entirely private, it was always layered with social awareness, strategic observation, and the possibility of public scrutiny. In the villas, bathhouses, and private gardens of Rome, desire was enacted with careful choreography, balancing indulgence with discretion, mentorship with aesthetic cultivation, and intimacy with hierarchy. Yet, desire did not exist only in these structured relationships. Across the classical world, homoeroticism was woven into art, literature, and ritual. Mosaics depict mythological scenes of love between men and the beauty of youth, while epigrams and letters record whispers of illicit pleasure, satire, and scandal. Frescoes capture gestures so subtle, a glance, a touch, a tilt of the head, that the observer becomes aware not only of intimacy but also of its cultural significance. Erotic engagement is thus preserved as both act and reflection, private indulgence and public expression, fleeting pleasure and enduring aesthetic. Scandal, always a companion to intimacy, both preserves and distorts these currents of desire. Accounts of senators, poets, philosophers, and emperors reveal a delicate tension. Pleasure excites admiration, envy, and rumor, while exposure brings shame, censure, or even exile. Through these stories, desire becomes performative, aesthetic, and political. It is a subtle art, requiring discretion, psychological acumen, and strategic awareness. Even as society imposes moral boundaries, the human impulse to seek intimacy, to experience beauty, and to engage in erotic play persists, adapting to constraints while retaining its profound resonance. The late classical world, especially the later Roman centuries, presents a landscape of negotiation between pleasure, morality, and social expectation. With the rise of new religious and ethical frameworks, erotic life becomes increasingly circumscribed, yet desire finds private refuge. Festivals, ritualized celebrations, and carefully choreographed gatherings offer socially sanctioned avenues for expression, while secluded chambers, gardens, and bathhouses preserve intimate indulgence away from the gaze of society. Erotic practice is thus transformed, becoming simultaneously adaptive, reflective, and aesthetic, a meditation on human behavior as much as an engagement with pleasure. Even within these limitations, the psychological sophistication of the participants is remarkable. Patrons cultivate influence, aesthetic taste, and mentorship. Companions develop discretion, social intelligence, and emotional attunement. Desire becomes a medium for instruction, a vehicle for social strategy, and a site of ethical reflection. The relationship between pleasure and consequence is never linear. It is a dance of subtlety, awareness, and cultural sophistication, preserved through literature, anecdote, and the traces left in art. In this, we observe a profound understanding of human nature, where intimacy and reflection coexist in a complex, layered interaction. As we traverse this world, the interplay of beauty, power, and desire is evident everywhere. From the statues that capture youthful perfection to the letters that whisper of longing and risk, every artifact offers insight into the careful orchestration of human intimacy. Erotic engagement is simultaneously private and public, ephemeral and enduring, pleasure and instruction intertwined. Through these practices, the classical world demonstrates that desire, far from being merely indulgent, is an art, a reflection, and a subtle form of cultural communication. The cultural legacy of these practices continues to echo. Homoeroticism, scandal, aesthetic cultivation, and mentorship collectively reveal a society deeply attuned to the nuances of human interaction, the power of observation, and the enduring significance of beauty. Desire is a lens through which to view not only personal intimacy but also social hierarchy, political influence, and cultural sophistication. Even when suppressed, hidden, or morally contested, these currents of intimacy persist, leaving traces that inspire reflection, curiosity, and understanding across millennia. In the end, The secret sex lives of ancient Greeks and Romans are not merely tales of indulgence, scandal, or forbidden pleasure. They are windows into the delicate orchestration of human behavior, the reflection of society in art and literature, and the enduring interplay between private desire and public consequence. Each anecdote, each fragment of poetry, each preserved artwork carries the weight of centuries of human observation, aesthetic refinement, and psychological insight. To explore them is to traverse a hidden river of intimacy, scandal, and reflection flowing quietly beneath the public face of civilization. As night drapes itself over the classical city, one can almost hear these whispers of desire echoing across marble corridors, gardens, and secluded chambers. They speak of longing and instruction, of scandal and discretion, of intimacy carefully negotiated within the boundaries of society. These currents of erotic culture, both ephemeral and enduring, invite us to contemplate the profound subtlety of human desire. They remind us that even in the most structured and hierarchical societies, the intimate currents of the heart, body, and mind continue to flow, shaping culture, memory, and the very perception of what it means to live, love, and observe. Thus begins our journey into the secret sex lives and homoerotic culture of the ancient Greeks and Romans, a journey that will carry us through scandals both whispered and recorded, through private indulgence and public scrutiny, and through centuries of erotic sophistication preserved in art, literature, and human memory. In this exploration, we encounter not only pleasure but reflection, not only intimacy but cultural insight, not only scandal but enduring legacy. The classical world, with its secret corridors of desire, invites us to listen, to imagine, and to understand the delicate, enduring, and profoundly human currents of intimacy that continue to resonate across time. In the soft twilight of Athens, when the sun dips behind distant hills and the city exhales a quiet hum of life, there exists a space where words, wine, and desire intermingle in ways both deliberate and subtle. The streets are shadowed by colonnades, their marble pillars catching the last glimmers of gold, and in the private homes of citizens, the evening has only just begun. Torches flicker along narrow corridors, casting elongated silhouettes that dance against the walls, and within these walls, there is the faint murmur of voices, voices that speak of philosophy, of music, and of love. Here, in the intimate gatherings known as symposia, the rhythms of conversation are intertwined with gestures of attention, glances laden with meaning, and subtle acknowledgments of affection that transcend the simple act of speaking. To witness such a gathering is to glimpse a world in which intellectual pursuit and erotic tension coexist, not in conflict, but as part of a delicate, hypnotic dance. The symposium, a central fixture of Athenian social life, was both a ritual and a performance, a structured yet fluid space where the young and old, the student and the philosopher, the citizen and the companion, could explore the intersections of mind and body. Wine flowed freely in carefully measured doses, each cup serving to loosen the tongue and sharpen the imagination, creating a liminal space where propriety could bend, where boundaries could be tested. And yet, it was a space of rules, subtle and complex. To love, to desire, to engage in acts of intimacy, whether through conversation, shared laughter, or the gentle brush of a hand, required a careful navigation of social hierarchies. It was not merely indulgence, it was an art form, an intricate balance of affection, education, and consent, where the pursuit of desire was inseparable from the cultivation of virtue. Consider, for a moment, a young man seated beside an older companion, perhaps a teacher, perhaps a friend, perhaps both. Their conversation meanders from politics to poetry, philosophy to the recounting of legendary heroes. Each word, each pause, each glance is layered with meaning, a subtle choreography of power and affection. The older man imparts wisdom, the younger absorbs, yet the exchange is far from one-sided. Desire flows quietly beneath the surface, like a river moving under ice, sometimes barely perceptible, sometimes urgent and forceful. In the eyes of those participating, such relationships are not scandalous, they are celebrated as a conduit for growth, for education, for the refinement of both mind and body. The lines between mentorship and intimacy are porous, and in this permeability, a complex form of love emerges, one that defies easy categorization by modern standards. It is a love that is at once intellectual, emotional, and physical, a tapestry woven of intention, curiosity, and passion. Yet, even in these celebrated spaces, there is an undercurrent of tension, a quiet awareness that desire must be conducted with discretion. Public opinion, though more accepting in certain regards than in later societies, was always present, and acts of intimacy carried potential consequences. Stories and epigrams preserved in fragments hint at both devotion and scandal, at affection expressed openly and at passion kept secret. The Athenian mind approached love with a careful duality. On one hand, it was a natural, even necessary, expression of human experience. On the other, it was a force that could disturb social harmony if mismanaged. It is this balance, this constant negotiation, that gives the erotic history of Greece its enduring fascination, its tension, and its quiet eeriness. For every act of connection, there is an implicit shadow, the recognition that intimacy exists within a framework of expectation, ritual, and social hierarchy, and that one's desires, however natural, could always become a site of conflict or shame. Beyond the symposium itself, the city offers other spaces where desire and affection manifest in less structured ways. Gardens, quiet corners of temples, secluded walkways along the Acropolis, all these spaces serve as the backdrop for private encounters and unspoken connections. Here, gestures become meaningful, eyes speak volumes, and the unspoken is as potent as the declared. The aesthetic sensibilities of the Greeks, an intense appreciation for beauty, proportion, and the human form, extend naturally into these encounters, imbuing them with a quality that is simultaneously sensual and cerebral. To admire the body of a beloved, to trace its contours with the eye or in thought, is an act both of desire and of contemplation, a reflection of the Greek understanding that love and beauty are intertwined, that desire is inseparable from intellectual and artistic appreciation. And yet, the erotic in Athens is never merely about personal pleasure. It is also deeply intertwined with notions of virtue, education, and civic responsibility. A young man entering into a relationship with an elder is not merely seeking affection, he is participating in a ritualized form of growth, an education in ethics, politics, and poise. Likewise, the elder, by guiding and mentoring, asserts influence, shapes character, and participates in the subtle power dynamics of the city. Desire becomes a conduit for knowledge and moral development, and the very act of loving, of being loved, is imbued with philosophical significance. Within this framework, what modern sensibilities might view as scandalous becomes a recognized, celebrated, and complex cultural practice, an intricate dance in which every movement carries both personal and societal weight. Women, too, inhabit this landscape of desire, though often in different roles and with different expectations. In private spheres, in the shadowed confines of homes or gardens, women could exercise influence, display wit, and cultivate their own networks of affection and companionship. Though the public discourse often centers on male-male relationships, the threads of female intimacy and desire are present, subtle but undeniable. They manifest in poetry, in household rituals, in the mentorship of younger women, and in moments of friendship and affection that carry their own erotic and emotional resonance. In some cases, these relationships are documented only faintly, glimpsed in epigrams, inscriptions, and the occasional scandal recounted by commentators with varying degrees of moral judgment. Yet the trace is enough to suggest that desire, mentorship, and intimacy were not the sole province of men, they were part of a broader human experience, a spectrum of connections woven into the very fabric of society. Philosophy itself provides another lens through which to consider these dynamics. Plato's dialogues, particularly the Symposium, offer a meditation on the nature of love that transcends the corporeal while never entirely separating it from the physical. In his account of the banquet where philosophers and poets gather to extol Eros, love is discussed as a force that can elevate the soul, sharpen the mind, and forge bonds of profound significance. Yet within these lofty discussions lies a recognition of the human, the sensual, the erotic, the acknowledgement that desire is not merely an obstacle to wisdom but a companion to it, a thread woven through the cultivation of virtue and intellect. In this tension between body and mind, between desire and reason, the Greeks reveal a nuanced understanding of sexuality that is at once meditative and electric, serene and unsettling, subtle and deeply human. And so, as we move through the spaces of Athens, observing these gatherings, these gardens, these whispered moments of affection, we begin to sense a pattern. Desire is never simple, never wholly innocent, never wholly dangerous. It is a force that shapes lives, influences decisions, and colors relationships with both beauty and shadow. To love in Athens is to navigate a landscape of rules and freedoms, of mentorship and intimacy, of secrecy and celebration. It is to understand that the erotic is inseparable from the social, the educational, and the philosophical, and that each gesture, each glance, each carefully measured interaction carries layers of meaning that extend far beyond the moment itself. Even as the night deepens, and the lamp flames flicker and gutter along marble floors, there is a persistent hum of tension and possibility. For the young man learning, for the elder guiding, for the friends laughing in the candlelight, there is always the awareness that these connections exist in a liminal space, between pleasure and propriety, between secrecy and expression, between shadow and light. And it is within this liminality, this delicate suspension, that the true power and allure of Greek sexuality resides. It is not merely in the acts themselves but in the contemplation, in the anticipation, in the slow unfolding of desire and understanding, that we encounter a humanity at once familiar and profoundly alien, serene and disquieting, intimate and eternal. In this way, the symposia and private gatherings of Athens offer not only a lens into erotic practice but into the very psychology of desire itself, a meditation on the ways in which humans seek connection, guidance, and intimacy, a reflection on the interplay of power, affection, and identity, and a testament to the enduring complexity of love. As we sit with this reflection, tracing the contours of ancient lives in our imagination, we begin to perceive the faint, persistent pulse of eroticism in its many forms, an undercurrent that runs through literature, art, ritual, and memory, quietly shaping the world in ways both visible and hidden. As the moonlight filters over the worn stones of Athens, brushing the edges of temples and the steps of the agora with silver, we continue to wander through the spaces where love and desire intertwine with intellect and ritual. In the quiet chambers of private homes, in secluded gardens where the shadows lengthen and the scent of night-blooming flowers mingles with the faint aroma of wine and olive oil, we begin to perceive the subtler patterns of eroticism in Greek society, patterns that move beyond mere mentorship and conversation, reaching into the sacred, the artistic, and the ritualistic. These patterns suggest that desire, far from being a simple personal indulgence, was a form of engagement with the very fabric of civilization, with the ideals of beauty, philosophy, and social cohesion. Consider, for a moment, the ritualistic dimension of desire in the Greek world. Festivals dedicated to the gods were not merely public spectacles, they were immersive experiences in which boundaries of ordinary behavior were relaxed, inverted, or symbolically enacted. Within these festivals, processions, dances, and performances often contained elements of sensuality and homoerotic expression, acknowledging the fluidity of human desire while situating it within a framework of religious and civic significance. Here, the erotic was not profane but sacred, a channel through which individuals could explore connection, power, and identity under the watchful eyes of the divine. One can imagine a young man participating in a festival, his movements guided by ritualized steps, his gaze meeting that of another in a moment of fleeting recognition, the significance of their interaction encoded in the shared knowledge of the festival's rites. Desire, here, was at once playful, spiritual, and socially structured, a delicate balance that required both awareness and subtlety. This integration of eroticism with ritual extended into the arts, which in Greece were never merely decorative but profoundly expressive of human experience. Sculpture, fresco, vase painting, and poetry all served as repositories for desire, capturing fleeting gestures, intimate embraces, and tender glances. Vase paintings, in particular, offer a window into the private and public intersections of homoerotic interaction. Scenes of revelers reclining at symposia, of young men and their companions in tender embrace, of music and dance as vehicles of intimate connection, reveal the normalized presence of erotic relationships within daily and ceremonial life. Each depiction is precise in its attention to posture, gaze, and gesture, suggesting a culture that observed and codified the subtleties of desire with almost obsessive care. The erotic in Greek art is never crude, it is contemplative, refined, and inextricably tied to ideals of beauty, balance, and proportion. It is, in essence, a meditation, a visual poem, and a guide to navigating the complexities of intimacy. Yet alongside this celebration of beauty and desire lies a persistent awareness of power and hierarchy. In Greece, erotic relationships were often structured around age and social role, with older men assuming mentorship over younger companions. These relationships carried obligations, privileges, and expectations. They were educational as well as sensual, a conduit for shaping character and guiding youth into the civic, intellectual, and emotional life of the polis. The older companion was not merely a lover but a teacher, a guide, a figure whose approval and attention could shape the trajectory of the younger man's development. In return, the younger partner was expected to show respect, attentiveness, and an openness to both guidance and intimacy. Within this dynamic, desire was interwoven with duty, affection with instruction, and sensuality with philosophical reflection. Love, in this sense, was inseparable from the cultivation of the self and the polis, a potent reminder that erotic expression in Athens was never divorced from the broader structures of culture and society. Philosophical discourse in the Greek world further complicated and elevated the understanding of desire. Plato's Symposium, for instance, articulates love as a ladder, beginning with the appreciation of physical beauty but ascending toward the contemplation of higher truths, the beauty of the soul, the harmony of the mind, the eternal forms. Within these discussions, desire is both a starting point and a transformative force, a vehicle through which individuals can attain greater wisdom and ethical awareness. Yet even as love is elevated to the level of intellect and morality, its corporeal dimension is never entirely ignored. The body and its pleasures remain acknowledged, discussed, and, in some contexts, ritualized. Desire is, in the Platonic view, both earthly and celestial, a paradoxical force that draws human beings toward both fulfillment and transcendence. There is a subtle eeriness here, a sense that in the pursuit of the ideal, one must navigate temptation, ethical complexity, and the ever-present tension between personal longing and communal expectation. In parallel, poets such as Theognis offer more grounded, sometimes cautionary perspectives on desire and social conduct. Their epigrams and verses document the intricacies of affection, the social consequences of intimacy, and the delicate balance required to maintain favor, reputation, and connection. Within their words, one finds reflections on jealousy, secrecy, loyalty, and the fleeting nature of pleasure, elements that underscore the ever-present tension between freedom and constraint. Erotic expression, while celebrated in many contexts, was never unbounded. It existed within a lattice of social, ethical, and sometimes legal parameters. The Greeks, in this way, approached sexuality with both curiosity and care, understanding it as a force of profound significance, capable of shaping character, reinforcing hierarchy, and imbuing life with both delight and risk. The subtle complexity of these interactions extends to the intimate gestures that modern observers might overlook. A touch on the hand, a gaze held a fraction too long, a shared cup of wine, all could carry erotic weight, suggesting desire, consent, or affection. To interpret these gestures, one must be attuned to context, the age of the participants, the setting, the shared knowledge of cultural norms. The erotic was embedded in social literacy, a language that combined art, ritual, and observation. For the attentive, the ancient Greeks left an abundance of such signals, encoded in poetry, drama, art, and anecdote, creating a multi-layered record of intimate life that invites careful meditation. And within this meditation, the mind becomes aware of the eerie resonance of these practices, the way desire could be both celebrated and constrained, open and secret, playful and profoundly serious. Gardens, villas, and secluded temples functioned as microcosms of this erotic philosophy. In a sun-dappled courtyard or a moonlit atrium, lovers might meet, converse, and exchange gestures that carried intellectual and sensual significance. The ritual of privacy, curtains drawn, torches lit, soft music or the accompaniment of lyres, created a liminal space where the ordinary structures of society could be temporarily suspended. In such spaces, one could experiment with forms of intimacy, explore the boundaries of attraction, and cultivate both personal and philosophical understanding. The Greeks were acutely aware of the delicate interplay between observation and concealment, public performance and private indulgence. Desire was a practice, an art, and a form of reflection, an acknowledgement of human complexity and the ever-present tension between freedom and expectation. Even within these intimate moments, humor and play were often present, serving as both lubricant and metaphor. Banter, teasing, and wordplay were integral to the aesthetic of love and desire, allowing participants to explore boundaries without violating social norms. Cleverness was admired, subtlety celebrated, and wit became another medium through which affection and erotic tension were expressed. In this, one senses the quiet, slightly unsettling beauty of Greek erotic culture, its insistence on refinement, its awareness of risk, and its acknowledgement of desire as a force both natural and potentially transformative. As we go deeper into these spaces, one begins to notice the pervasive influence of ideals on personal conduct. The pursuit of beauty, virtue, and honor is never separate from the pursuit of affection, mentorship, and erotic fulfillment. The Greeks were conscious architects of desire, attuning themselves to rhythm, proportion, and subtlety, whether in sculpture, poetry, or the quiet choreography of intimate encounters. And yet, within this conscious cultivation, there is a persistent shadow, the knowledge that desire, like life itself, is ephemeral, fragile, and often constrained by forces beyond the individual's control. The awareness of this shadow adds an unsettling depth to the narrative, a gentle reminder that even the most celebrated pleasures exist within a delicate web of responsibility, expectation, and social consequence. Thus, by the end of our evening stroll through Athens, the image that emerges is neither simplistic nor easily categorized. Love and desire are omnipresent, manifesting in ritual, art, poetry, philosophy, and private interactions. The Greeks have constructed a world in which eroticism is a reflection of intellect, a conduit for growth, a form of meditation, and an acknowledgement of human vulnerability. Their practices are at once structured and fluid, celebratory and shadowed, familiar and alien. To understand them is to enter a world of quiet tension, of subtle observation, of layered meaning, an experience that is as enchanting as it is slightly disquieting, as instructive as it is immersive. And as the night wanes, and the first hint of dawn touches the Acropolis, one realizes that this is only the beginning. Athens has revealed a landscape of desire, intellect, and ritual, but the journey is far from complete. The threads of eroticism that weave through this city will continue to unfold, guiding us toward Rome, where the contours of power, intimacy, and social expectation will take on new shapes, new tensions, and new forms of expression. For now, we linger in the afterglow of Athenian evenings, letting the rhythm of symposia, gardens, and whispered confidences settle into memory, ready to accompany us as our exploration deepens, broadens, and ultimately crosses the Mediterranean toward the heart of the Roman world. As dawn breaks over the sprawling city of Rome, its light brushing the terracotta rooftops and the polished marble of the Forum, one can almost hear the heartbeat of a society alive with power, ritual, and desire. The city hums with activity, merchants call out their wares, senators discuss legislation in voices that echo off stone, and the rhythmic clang of construction mingles with the faint aroma of baking bread and incense from nearby temples. Yet behind this public vitality, in private atria, quiet gardens, and shadowed corridors, another rhythm persists, a rhythm of desire, intimacy, and the careful negotiation of power through personal connection. Here, in Rome, the erotic life is never divorced from the mechanisms of influence, and the pursuit of pleasure is often inseparable from the assertion of status, the cultivation of loyalty, and the exercise of authority. The Roman understanding of sexuality, particularly male-male intimacy, is at once practical, ritualized, and deeply intertwined with social hierarchy. Whereas the Greeks idealized mentorship and intellectual companionship as a conduit for erotic connection, the Romans incorporated such relationships into a broader system of civic and personal influence. To be desired, to be chosen as a companion, was not merely a matter of personal affection, it was a reflection of social standing, political leverage, and the tacit acknowledgement of one's position within the intricate lattice of Roman society. And yet, this very intertwining of desire and status imbues each encounter with a subtle tension. Pleasure is never entirely private, and intimacy is always shadowed by observation, judgment, and the potential for scandal. In private villas, the architecture itself seems designed to accommodate both the public and the secret. Atriums, courtyards, and peristyles allow light to filter in, creating spaces of beauty and contemplation, while hidden chambers, curtained alcoves, and secluded gardens offer sanctuary for more intimate exploration. One can imagine a wealthy Roman patrician reclining on a couch beneath the shade of a columned portico, his young companion seated beside him. Their conversation drifts between politics, philosophy, and poetry, punctuated by moments of quiet laughter or a glance that lingers longer than decorum might suggest. The exchange is both playful and serious, a negotiation of affection and influence, a subtle choreography in which every gesture, word, and glance carries weight. To witness such an interaction is to perceive the delicate balance that defines Roman erotic culture, freedom and constraint, pleasure and duty, intimacy and observation, all intertwined. The city itself seems to pulse with these hidden currents. In the Forum, in the basilicas, along the steps of the temples, one might observe the subtle acknowledgement of desire encoded in gesture and presence. Men of influence, consuls, senators, and magistrates, navigate a public life of scrutiny, yet they also cultivate private circles where their preferences, affections, and desires can manifest without censure. Patronage, mentorship, and companionship often overlap in ways that reflect both affection and strategy, with erotic undertones present in mentorship and favor. The young Roman citizen, learning his place in society, becomes not only a political actor but a participant in this delicate network of desire and influence, observing, learning, and occasionally reciprocating in ways that further both personal and civic aims. In this sense, the erotic and the political are inseparable, the private and the public intertwined in a tension that is at once natural and carefully mediated. Bathhouses, a hallmark of Roman urban life, offer another lens through which to observe erotic practice and social interaction. These public spaces, communal yet highly structured, allow for both socializing and intimate encounters. In the warm embrace of the caldarium, in the reflective quiet of the tepidarium, and along the long benches of the palestra, individuals might engage in conversation, display their physicality, or indulge in flirtation with companions. These encounters, while often socially sanctioned, are imbued with the subtle negotiation of status, desire, and observation. The Romans were acutely aware of the gaze, both literal and figurative, and eroticism within these spaces is always tempered by awareness of propriety, by the acknowledgement of hierarchy, and by the complex interplay of personal and civic identity. The bathhouse is a microcosm of Roman life itself, a place where pleasure and propriety exist in tension, where intimacy can flourish and simultaneously be constrained, and where the ritual of appearance mediates the rhythm of desire. Art and literature in Rome further illuminate the contours of erotic life. Frescoes in villas along the Bay of Naples, poetry in the voices of Ovid and Martial, and epigrams carved into stone or whispered in verse all reveal a society deeply attuned to the aesthetics of intimacy. Homoerotic relationships, though sometimes coded or veiled, are present and acknowledged, often celebrated, sometimes satirized. In poetry, the tension between admiration and transgression is palpable. The poet may extol the beauty of a young man, reflecting on the pleasures of touch, gaze, and companionship, yet simultaneously caution against the perils of public scandal or social disapproval. The literary record, therefore, functions as both a mirror and a map. It reflects desires that were experienced privately and publicly, while guiding the interpretation and conduct of erotic engagement within socially acceptable bounds. It is here that the subtlety of Roman eroticism becomes most evident. Unlike the Greek emphasis on philosophical and educational mentorship, the Roman approach is more socially codified, attuned to hierarchy, and attentive to the interplay of consent, status, and discretion. To desire, to love, to engage intimately is to participate in a system that is simultaneously personal and public, pleasurable and strategic. The chosen companion is a reflection of taste, education, and social alignment. The older man may be a patron, a political ally, or a mentor, and his attentions carry both erotic and social significance. The younger partner, in turn, is a student, a protégé, or a social participant, navigating both the pleasures and the responsibilities of his position. Desire becomes a tool as well as an experience, an instrument of intimacy and influence, a medium through which social bonds are affirmed and personal identity is negotiated. Even in the most private of moments, one senses the pervasive tension of observation. The walls of villas and atria, though protective, are porous to rumor, to perception, to moral scrutiny. A gesture, a touch, a glance can echo beyond the immediate participants, influencing reputation, alliance, and social standing. This duality, pleasure intertwined with vigilance, imbues Roman erotic life with a quiet eeriness. Desire is never entirely free, it exists within a lattice of accountability and expectation. Yet it is precisely this tension that renders the intimate experience profoundly compelling, emotionally charged, and culturally significant. The erotic, in Rome as in Athens, is never merely physical, it is a force of psychological, social, and philosophical resonance. The philosophical frameworks that inform Roman erotic culture add yet another layer of complexity. Stoicism, Epicureanism, and other schools of thought offer guidance on moderation, self-control, and the pursuit of virtue, while also acknowledging the natural impulses of the body and the mind. Desire, according to these frameworks, must be managed with reason, but not extinguished, indulged with discernment, but not recklessly. The tension between impulse and restraint, between longing and propriety, mirrors the physical architecture of Roman spaces, the structured social hierarchies, and the careful choreography of private interaction. Every encounter is thus simultaneously an expression of desire and a meditation on self-discipline, identity, and societal expectation. In the nocturnal hours, as torches gutter and the city quiets, one can imagine the continuation of these subtle practices in private. Villas illuminated only by lamplight, bedrooms scented with oils and flowers, curtains drawn to create intimate spaces of observation and retreat, these are the environments where homoerotic relationships flourish most freely, where mentorship and affection merge seamlessly with erotic experience. The young and the old, the privileged and the observant, participate in a dance that is at once social, psychological, and profoundly personal. The ritual of presence, of touch, of conversation, is elevated to an art form, a careful negotiation of power and intimacy, a meditation on the fleeting nature of pleasure, and the enduring resonance of connection. Rome, in all its grandeur and structure, teaches a lesson that is simultaneously beautiful and disquieting, that intimacy cannot exist in isolation. Desire is shaped by power, by observation, by culture, by philosophy, by ritual. It exists within frameworks that are visible and invisible, codified and subtle, celebrated and censured. To love and be desired is to navigate a landscape of pleasure and peril, to participate in a network of meaning that extends beyond the self, into society, and into history itself. And as we meditate on these structures, we begin to understand the enduring fascination of Roman eroticism, its elegance, its subtlety, its careful balance of freedom and constraint, its quiet, almost hypnotic eeriness. By the first light of morning, one realizes that the city has not revealed all its secrets. Every villa, every bathhouse, every forum still holds stories untold, gestures unnoticed, desires unrecorded. Yet in the spaces we have explored, the atria, gardens, bathhouses, and corridors, we have traced a map of intimacy that illuminates the interplay of power, desire, and social structure in one of history's most influential civilizations. The patterns of attraction, mentorship, and erotic expression emerge as a reflection not only of personal longing but of civic life, philosophical reflection, and cultural continuity. And as we prepare to move further into Rome's private and public arenas of desire, the shadows lengthen and the quiet tension of the city invites us to linger a little longer, to observe, to reflect, and to understand the subtle rhythms that shaped love, sex, and identity in a world simultaneously ancient and eerily familiar. As dusk falls across Rome, the city adopts a softer hue. Shadows stretch over the forum and the marble steps of temples, and the faint glow of oil lamps flickers through open windows and along the quiet peristyles of private homes. It is in these liminal spaces, between day and night, public and private, that the hidden currents of erotic life reveal themselves most vividly. The city, which outwardly thrives on order, law, and hierarchy, quietly pulses with desire, secrecy, and the subtle performance of intimacy. Here, the erotic is entwined with ritual, codified in art, and occasionally whispered in scandal. It is simultaneously celebrated, manipulated, and feared. Central to this complex tapestry is the role of ritualized homoerotic practice. Unlike the more philosophical or pedagogical forms observed in Greece, Roman erotic rituals often intersected with performance, spectacle, and the assertion of identity. Certain religious festivals and household rites offered sanctioned spaces for expressions of intimacy, sometimes blurring gendered boundaries or hierarchies. In a private atrium, one might witness the older patron gently guiding the younger companion through a series of gestures, touches, or exchanges meant to cultivate both affection and self-discipline. These acts, while intensely personal, were conducted within a framework that emphasized decorum, observation, and symbolic meaning. They were, in essence, an art form, an orchestrated blend of pedagogy, desire, and subtle assertion of social influence. Art in Rome offers the most enduring testimony to these practices. Frescoes from villas in Pompeii and Herculaneum, often preserved in exquisite detail, depict intimate interactions that range from playful flirtation to explicit erotic acts. These images, while visually striking, are never merely pornographic. They are a meditation on beauty, social status, and relational dynamics. Scenes of reclining couples, youth with older companions, and group interactions in banquet settings reveal the coded yet overt presence of homoerotic desire in elite households. Every curve of the body, tilt of the head, and alignment of gaze is carefully composed, reflecting an aesthetic sensibility that celebrates the human form, social positioning, and the theatricality of intimacy. For the modern observer, there is an unsettling quality to these works. Their artistry evokes admiration, yet their candidness challenges contemporary notions of propriety, leaving a lingering sense of voyeuristic complicity. The literary record complements these visual cues. Poets such as Martial, Catullus, and Ovid interweave admiration, desire, and satire, producing texts that celebrate eroticism while commenting on social boundaries. Martial, in particular, is notable for his epigrams that blend wit with erotic observation, often exposing scandalous situations with subtle irony. These poems capture the tension between desire and social constraint. A young man's beauty may inspire public praise, yet that very admiration could become a source of ridicule or moral judgment. In Ovid's Ars Amatoria, instruction on seduction, courtship, and erotic artistry further illuminates the Roman understanding of intimacy as a skill to be cultivated, regulated, and subtly performed. In these literary spaces, desire is neither entirely hidden nor fully liberated. It is mediated, nuanced, and bound to the expectations of both the individual and society. Scandal, then, emerges as a recurring shadow over these private and semi-public acts. Roman elites, aware of the potential consequences of exposure, often engaged in secrecy and subtlety. Yet the very structures that enabled discretion, curtains, secluded gardens, and private chambers, could not entirely shield them from rumor or censure. Anecdotes recorded by historians such as Suetonius and Tacitus reveal how erotic preference could become political weaponry, social gossip, or moral accusation. Senators and emperors alike were scrutinized, their private actions transformed into public spectacle, their desires interpreted as reflections of character, leadership, and propriety. Even as homoeroticism was integrated into social and cultural practice, it was never free from the possibility of public exposure, creating a persistent tension between private indulgence and civic expectation. The interplay of secrecy and revelation, pleasure and consequence, is what imbues Roman erotic culture with both fascination and eeriness. Among the rituals that intersected with homoerotic expression, the banquet, or convivium, remains a central practice. Banquets were carefully orchestrated social performances in which food, music, conversation, and intimacy coexisted. Elite Romans reclined on couches, attended by companions whose presence was both a personal delight and a reflection of status. Wine loosened inhibitions, poetry encouraged reflection, and subtle gestures allowed erotic signaling. The act of reclining side by side, engaging in shared ritualized consumption of food and drink, or exchanging playful banter created a microcosm in which power, desire, and social understanding were simultaneously enacted. To participate in such a gathering was to engage in a delicate dance of observation, consent, and subtle competition, an immersive lesson in the ethics, aesthetics, and strategy of erotic engagement. The physical spaces themselves, bedchambers, peristyles, and private gardens, were structured to enhance both intimacy and discretion. Curtains, latticed windows, and hidden passages allowed participants to navigate between public visibility and private immersion. The sensory environment, soft music, oil lamps casting gentle illumination, aromatic oils and flowers, was carefully composed to stimulate and guide attention. Touch, scent, and sound were orchestrated as part of a holistic practice of eroticism, heightening the emotional and intellectual resonance of desire. In these meticulously arranged spaces, the pursuit of intimacy became both art and ritual, a practice as much about mindfulness and cultivation as it was about physical pleasure. The presence of young companions, often adolescents under the guidance of older men, further illustrates the intersection of eroticism and pedagogy. Relationships were structured to cultivate social, intellectual, and physical refinement. The older partner assumed the role of mentor, shaping conduct and taste, while the younger was expected to demonstrate attentiveness, discretion, and adaptability. Desire was embedded in this relational structure but was never divorced from its educational and social context. The ethical dimension of such relationships, as debated in literary and philosophical texts, was paramount. The goal was to refine character while exploring intimacy, rather than to exploit or dominate. Yet the potential for imbalance, coercion, or scandal remained ever present, adding a subtle tension that colors the historical record with both fascination and unease. Artistic representation extended beyond domestic spaces. Public statues, reliefs, and depictions of mythological narratives often included homoerotic elements, creating a cultural backdrop that normalized and aestheticized desire while embedding it within broader moral and philosophical lessons. The myth of Ganymede, for instance, recurs in visual and literary sources as a paradigmatic example of youth, beauty, and divine or aristocratic desire. By integrating erotic motifs into widely recognized myths, Roman society both codified and mediated expressions of homoeroticism, offering models of beauty, affection, and conduct that could be emulated, admired, or cautiously imitated. Yet it is precisely in the interstice between admiration and transgression that the eerie, hypnotic quality of Roman erotic culture emerges. Desire exists in tension with law, expectation, and observation. Intimacy is always shadowed by potential scandal. Pleasure is carefully weighed against social and political consequence. The resulting psychology is intricate. Individuals navigate a web of longing, performance, and caution, fully aware that even the most private moments could resonate across social space. In contemplating this, one becomes conscious not only of the human universality of erotic impulse but also of the sophisticated, psychologically aware, and socially mediated ways in which it was cultivated, expressed, and regulated in Rome. Poetic and anecdotal evidence reveals the richness of these tensions. Martial's epigrams, for example, often celebrate erotic ingenuity, beauty, and wit while simultaneously mocking excess, indiscretion, or social misstep. Ovid's guidance on seduction emphasizes strategy, aesthetics, and mutual pleasure, portraying desire as both an art and a carefully disciplined pursuit. Even historians note scandals involving emperors and elite citizens, revealing the delicate balance between discretion, indulgence, and public perception. Across these records, one observes a culture deeply conscious of its own eroticism, continuously negotiating the interplay of beauty, desire, and propriety, and cultivating a subtle awareness of the shadows that accompany pleasure. In the nocturnal quiet of Rome, one might envision a young man and his companion walking along a moonlit peristyle, their conversation light, punctuated by occasional glances and gestures heavy with meaning. Within the same city, another pair reclines in a curtained chamber, surrounded by faint music and the scent of oils, practicing intimacy as ritual, performance, and meditation. Across villas, bathhouses, and forums, the rhythms of desire are interwoven with social calculation, artistic expression, and philosophical reflection. These currents of intimacy and attraction form a hidden lattice beneath the city's visible structure, shaping relationships, conduct, and memory, and leaving traces that will endure long after the streets fall silent. Thus, Roman erotic life reveals itself as a complex and multilayered phenomenon, ritualized, aestheticized, socially regulated, and psychologically profound. It is a world in which homoerotic relationships exist simultaneously as personal delight, pedagogical strategy, social performance, and occasionally, source of scandal. Desire is cultivated, observed, and disciplined, intimacy is performed, meditated upon, and documented through art and literature. And yet, throughout this intricate network, the human experience, longing, curiosity, affection, and tension, remains immediate and palpable, resonating across the centuries with both fascination and unease. By the time dawn touches the Capitoline Hill, casting long shadows over the Forum, we are left with an awareness of the profound subtlety, artfulness, and psychological depth of Roman homoeroticism. The city has offered its lessons in desire, ritual, and risk, illuminating the ways in which intimacy was inseparable from social hierarchy, aesthetic contemplation, and philosophical reflection. These threads of erotic practice, carefully woven into the tapestry of daily and ceremonial life, guide us toward further understanding of human longing, both in the past and in the echoing present. Rome, in all its grandeur, restraint, and subtlety, stands as a testament to the enduring complexity of desire, a world where pleasure, art, and social negotiation dance together in quiet, almost hypnotic patterns. The cities of Greece and Rome, even in their grandeur and order, were never merely collections of stone, marble, or sunlit plazas. They were living organisms, pulsing with ambition, rhetoric, and the quiet, persistent currents of desire. In these spaces, homoeroticism was far more than private indulgence, it was intertwined with politics, influence, and the subtle mechanisms by which power was negotiated. To walk the streets of Athens in the later classical period, or to wander the corridors of Roman palaces during the twilight of the Republic, is to feel the faint echo of desire behind the public facade, a pulse of attraction shaping decisions, alliances, and reputations. Here, eroticism, mentorship, and social hierarchy coexisted with political ambition, creating a world where pleasure and strategy were inseparable. In Athens, the later classical period saw the intensification of homoerotic relationships within elite circles, particularly among those engaged in civic debate, philosophical inquiry, and military strategy. The young aristocrat, educated in the rhetoric of the agora, often maintained intimate relationships with older companions whose approval could influence social mobility, military advancement, and political affiliation. These relationships were neither entirely hidden nor entirely public. They existed in a liminal space of ritualized observation, intellectual exchange, and aesthetic engagement. Desire, in this context, was a force both personal and political, capable of shaping allegiances as surely as eloquence or military prowess. The political dimensions of desire were particularly evident in Athens' councils and symposia, where intimate companionship often paralleled mentorship in public affairs. A young man seated beside an older statesman might absorb lessons in rhetoric, philosophy, and civic duty, while also navigating the delicate boundaries of attraction and propriety. Every glance, gesture, or shared jest carried significance, to misstep could damage reputation, to respond appropriately could solidify bonds of loyalty and influence. The erotic was thus inseparable from the social and political machinery of the city. The symposia were stages where intellect and intimacy intertwined, where political and personal favor intersected, and where the cultivation of desire became, paradoxically, both a private pleasure and a public strategy. In literature and historiography, these dynamics are preserved with varying degrees of subtlety. Xenophon, Plato, and later authors hint at the entwining of mentorship, political guidance, and erotic engagement. The relationships between generals and their protégés, between philosophers and students, suggest a landscape in which homoeroticism served as both emotional support and political leverage. It was a form of power exercised quietly, through attention, influence, and personal devotion, rather than through overt coercion. The young companion, through intelligence, discretion, and beauty, could gain access to resources, networks, and prestige. Conversely, the older partner exercised both authority and erotic influence, shaping the trajectory of protégés' lives in ways that reinforced social, political, and sometimes familial hierarchies. Meanwhile, Rome, with its intricate interplay of political ambition and social ritual, cultivated homoeroticism with its own distinct, yet related, flavor. In the late Republic, as senators, consuls, and magistrates navigated alliances and rivalries, desire was frequently an unspoken element of political strategy. Young men, often from patrician families, could find themselves in relationships with powerful older figures, not only for education and companionship but also as a means of access, protection, and advancement. Erotic engagement was thus a form of social currency, a subtle means of influencing opinion, consolidating loyalty, and securing favor. And yet, these arrangements required careful attention to public perception. In Rome, as in Athens, exposure, rumor, or misstep could have profound consequences, transforming private intimacy into public scandal. Bathhouses, villas, and private gardens remained central arenas for these negotiations of desire and influence. In the privacy of a villa atrium, a young Roman might engage in discussion, shared study, and intimate conversation with an older patron, while simultaneously navigating erotic tension. In bathhouses, communal yet semi-private spaces allowed for casual observation, flirtation, and exchange, reinforcing social hierarchy while providing opportunities for desire to manifest. Even the physical environment, the architecture of rooms, placement of benches, and arrangement of curtains, facilitated the careful choreography of intimacy, observation, and control. Desire was not merely an internal impulse, it was mediated by space, social expectation, and ritualized behavior. Art and literature provide further illumination. Frescoes, mosaics, and epigrams often depict intimate interactions between men, sometimes alluding to political or social significance. The myth of Ganymede persists, alongside other depictions of young male beauty, serving as both aesthetic ideal and moral exemplar. In poetry, Martial, Catullus, and Juvenal explore the interplay of attraction, status, and social perception, often combining erotic admiration with cautionary overtones regarding public opinion. Ovid's later works, reflecting both seduction and strategy, illustrate the cultivation of desire as an art intertwined with personal influence. Across these sources, eroticism is always multifaceted. It is aesthetic, emotional, pedagogical, and political, a force shaping private lives and public trajectories alike. The social risk inherent in such relationships is equally evident. Roman historians recount numerous scandals involving figures of power whose erotic conduct became fodder for political rivals or moral commentary. The sexual choices of emperors, senators, and generals were scrutinized, criticized, and used strategically to undermine opponents or consolidate authority. Desire, while celebrated in private, could transform into liability if mismanaged or exposed. This delicate balance between pleasure and propriety, between influence and discretion, permeates the historical record, leaving an almost hypnotic awareness of tension and risk. Eroticism was not only personal and aesthetic, it was a terrain of potential triumph, shame, or even ruin. In Athens, the political and erotic intersected similarly, though within slightly different frameworks. Elite young men trained in rhetoric, philosophy, and military service were often guided by older mentors who combined education with desire, subtly shaping both mind and body. Symposia offered structured yet flexible spaces in which political alliances, personal bonds, and erotic attraction converged. The public and private, the civic and intimate, existed in perpetual negotiation. The aesthetic appreciation of youth and beauty was intertwined with civic responsibility, intellectual development, and emotional connection. Desire became, in essence, a conduit for the cultivation of excellence, both moral and intellectual, while simultaneously navigating the shadows of social scrutiny. Even within these structured relationships, humor, play, and subtlety were crucial. Banter, teasing, and wordplay allowed participants to explore intimacy without overstepping boundaries, to test attention and consent while reinforcing social cohesion. In this, both Greeks and Romans exhibited a nuanced understanding of the psychological dimensions of eroticism. Desire was inseparable from context, awareness, and performance. Intimacy was a form of negotiation, of observation, of subtle power exchange, and of aesthetic engagement. In contemplating these subtleties, one senses the slightly disquieting beauty of ancient erotic culture. Pleasure, desire, and influence are never simple, they are deeply interwoven with society, ritual, and the human mind. The nocturnal rituals of intimacy, conducted under lamplight or candle glow, extend these dynamics further. In private chambers, young men and their companions might exchange confidences, gestures, and touch, each calibrated to both aesthetic delight and social propriety. The careful orchestration of light, scent, sound, and movement amplifies emotional and erotic resonance. In these spaces, desire becomes simultaneously meditative and performative, an artful engagement of mind, body, and social awareness. The participant inhabits multiple roles: lover, pupil, observer, strategist, navigating pleasure, instruction, and subtle negotiation. In this interplay, the erotic functions as both personal indulgence and social instrument, reflecting the depth and sophistication of ancient understanding of intimacy. Scandal, of course, remained a persistent shadow. Anecdotes preserved by Suetonius, Tacitus, and Plutarch reveal the consequences of desire made visible, whispered rumors, public condemnation, and political exploitation of erotic conduct. Even as homoerotic relationships were normalized in certain circles, the potential for public exposure rendered them a carefully managed element of social strategy. Pleasure and caution coexisted in a fragile balance, creating tension that was at once intimate, aesthetic, and ethically resonant. The human experience of longing, observation, and discretion is palpable across these narratives, a faint pulse beneath the marble and ink of history. By the early morning, as first light illuminates the columns of Rome and the Acropolis of Athens alike, one is left with a sense of the profound intricacy of desire as it intersects with power. Homoeroticism in these societies was never solely private or solely public. It existed in the interstice, shaping relationships, influencing politics, and mediating social interaction. Desire was taught, observed, performed, and sometimes exploited. It was aesthetic, ethical, and strategic, creating a lattice of intimacy and influence that permeated both domestic and public life. The erotic currents of Greece and Rome flow together in a continuum, in mentorship, in symposia, in villas and forums. Desire shapes, refines, and occasionally destabilizes human connection. The subtlety, beauty, and psychological sophistication of ancient erotic culture is undeniable, yet it exists within shadows of caution, hierarchy, and risk. Desire, though natural and celebrated, is never free from the frameworks of observation, expectation, and social consequence. It is this interplay, the tension between freedom and structure, pleasure and scrutiny, that defines the erotic experience in later Greece and Rome. Through these patterns, one can trace the delicate architecture of intimacy, the carefully cultivated interplay of affection and influence, and the quiet, almost hypnotic, resonance of homoerotic desire across centuries and civilizations. As the sun sinks behind the hills of Athens and the rooftops of Rome glow with a waning golden light, the intimate and political worlds of these ancient cities converge in ways both subtle and profound. The lives of the powerful, generals, philosophers, senators, and rulers, reveal a landscape where homoerotic desire is not a private indulgence but a force shaping alliances, fueling ambition, and, at times, inciting scandal. These are the stories whispered in corridors of power, recorded in poetry, gossip, and legal proceedings, preserved with both fascination and moral judgment, carrying the echo of human longing across centuries. Consider the figure of Alexander the Great, whose campaigns reshaped the Mediterranean world and whose intimate bonds became almost legendary. Among his companions, the youth Hephaestion stands as both confidant and object of affection, a relationship that illustrates the inseparability of desire and influence. Historical accounts, filtered through Plutarch and Arrian, suggest that Alexander's admiration for Hephaestion extended beyond the political into the intensely personal. Their companionship exemplifies the Greek ideal, a union of intellectual, emotional, and erotic affinity, deeply interwoven with leadership, loyalty, and shared ambition. Even in the midst of conquest, desire was never idle, it was present, guiding attention, shaping judgment, and infusing the orchestration of empire with a subtle, almost mystical, resonance of intimacy. Yet this intimacy, even at the highest echelons of power, was shadowed by vulnerability. Alexander's relationship with Hephaestion was scrutinized by his generals, advisors, and subjects, the personal and the political intertwined in ways that could both strengthen alliances and provoke tension. Desire, in this context, is a potent instrument, its power magnified by proximity to authority. The bond between leader and companion illuminates a broader principle in Greek and Roman society: intimacy is never purely private, and erotic relationships can both consolidate influence and destabilize perception. The fascination with Alexander's personal life endures precisely because it illustrates the fine line between affection, power, and social expectation. In Rome, homoerotic influence manifests differently but with equal potency. Figures such as Julius Caesar and Mark Antony navigated political landscapes in which personal preference, erotic access, and mentorship were intertwined with alliances, patronage, and military command. Anecdotes preserved by Suetonius, Plutarch, and Cassius Dio hint at relationships that were simultaneously affectionate, sexual, and politically instrumental. The young companion of a powerful Roman could be both a trusted advisor and a source of aesthetic delight. The older figure could guide, protect, and exploit simultaneously. In this arena, desire is not merely pleasure but strategy, its exercise requiring finesse, discretion, and an acute awareness of social optics. Scandal, however, lurked perpetually beneath these relationships. The Roman appetite for gossip, satire, and moral commentary ensured that even carefully managed intimacy could become a weapon in political contests. Martial and Juvenal provide literary evidence of the thin line separating private desire from public censure, epigrams mocking youthful lovers, satires exposing sexual indulgence, and poems praising beauty while cautioning against impropriety. The erotic, in these narratives, is simultaneously celebrated, critiqued, and leveraged, reminding all participants that pleasure carries inherent risk when intertwined with visibility and power. Among the most famous examples is the relationship between Emperor Hadrian and Antinous. Hadrian, already a ruler of immense influence, elevated his young companion to a status that was at once personal, political, and almost divine. Antinous' death, whether accidental or otherwise, prompted Hadrian to deify him, founding cities and erecting statues in his memory. This act reveals the extremes to which desire could extend, merging personal affection, political projection, and religious ritual. Hadrian's devotion illustrates the power of homoerotic relationships to shape cultural memory, embedding personal longing into the enduring fabric of the empire. Yet it also underscores the potential for scandal, as Hadrian's intensity of attachment was subject to scrutiny and commentary by contemporaries, revealing the tension between private passion and public perception. Other historical anecdotes reveal similarly complex dynamics. Senators, generals, and magistrates frequently relied on intimate companions for counsel, companionship, and affirmation. The aesthetics of beauty and the subtleties of attraction were woven into mentorship, alliance building, and even military strategy. The intimacy of these bonds, often involving youth and age, reflects broader social hierarchies and expectations, illustrating how desire is inseparable from power and influence. A touch, a glance, a shared moment could consolidate loyalty, inspire courage, or subtly manipulate opinion. In these subtle movements, one sees the nuanced choreography of erotic politics. Pleasure is never isolated from consequence, and intimacy becomes a form of social negotiation. The intersection of homoeroticism and scandal is also apparent in the cautionary examples recorded by historians. The fall from grace of public figures due to accusations of inappropriate erotic conduct demonstrates the fragility of reputation and the omnipresent social gaze. Erotic favor, while potentially advantageous, could be wielded against its participants, transforming desire into leverage or weapon. This duality creates an almost hypnotic tension in the historical record. Pleasure exists alongside risk, intimacy alongside exposure, affection alongside moral and political scrutiny. It is precisely this interplay that gives the erotic life of ancient Greece and Rome its enduring fascination, both alluring and slightly unsettling. The arts continue to document these dynamics. Frescoes, reliefs, and inscriptions celebrate beauty, youth, and intimate companionship, often hinting at relationships that combined aesthetic admiration, emotional attachment, and political significance. Literary sources corroborate these depictions, offering insight into the subtleties of language, gesture, and social etiquette that mediated erotic interaction. These records collectively suggest a society acutely aware of the interdependence of desire and social structure, where intimacy is simultaneously aesthetic, emotional, pedagogical, and strategic. The observer is drawn into a world of careful choreography, where each action carries layered significance, and where erotic expression is inseparable from social and political negotiation. Even the more quotidian forms of intimacy, shared meals, symposia, bathing, and quiet walks, are imbued with significance. Every gesture becomes a form of communication, conveying preference, alliance, and potential influence. The young companion's attentiveness, beauty, and intelligence are evaluated not only for personal appeal but also for the social and political advantages they might confer. Conversely, the older partner's guidance, protection, and patronage reinforce status while cultivating loyalty and admiration. Desire is thus both a private experience and a tool of civic and social engagement, simultaneously personal and performative, subtle and potent. Desire could illuminate character, strengthen alliances, and inspire creativity, yet it could also incite envy, suspicion, and moral judgment. Erotic relationships were navigated with mindfulness, subtlety, and strategic awareness, requiring participants to attune themselves to social expectations, power dynamics, and the risks of exposure. The psychological sophistication displayed in these practices is striking. Participants understood the interplay of observation, consent, and perception, and leveraged desire not merely for pleasure but for guidance, influence, and cultural legacy. By the deepening twilight, as lanterns illuminate Roman atria and the columns of Athens catch the last rays of the sun, the stories of Alexander, Hadrian, and countless lesser-known figures coalesce into a complex tableau. The erotic currents of Greece and Rome, mentorship, beauty, intimacy, and influence, reveal themselves as integral to the functioning of society, politics, and culture. Desire is never inert, it shapes decisions, relationships, and legacies. Scandal hovers always in the periphery, reminding us that pleasure and risk are entwined, that intimacy is inseparable from observation, and that human longing is both a personal and profoundly social force. As night deepens, one perceives the resonance of these historical threads across time. Homoeroticism, far from being a private indulgence, is embedded in the machinery of power, mentorship, and cultural production. Each glance, touch, and gesture carries meaning, each relationship oscillates between personal delight and social consequence. The lives of these ancient figures, their joys and scandals, form a subtle lattice of erotic and political influence that extends beyond their own lifetimes, leaving traces in art, literature, and collective memory. By the quiet hours of midnight, the observer realizes the full depth of what these intertwined cultures reveal. Desire was not separate from social and political life, it was inseparable, shaping the contours of influence, reputation, and historical memory. The erotic currents of Greece and Rome illuminate the profound sophistication of human sociality, the artistry of intimacy, and the enduring tension between pleasure, discretion, and power. And as the first whispers of dawn begin to brush the Acropolis and the Roman hills, one is left with the meditative awareness that the past subtle rhythms of desire, influence, and scandal continue to echo, teaching us both fascination and caution, allure and reflection. In the heart of Rome, the city's ceaseless rhythm unfolds across sunlit forums, shadowed alleys, and marble-clad villas. Its grandeur is unmistakable. The forum teems with magistrates and merchants, the Colosseum hints at both spectacle and civic spectacle, and the intricate network of roads carries voices and footsteps alike. Yet beneath this public vibrancy exists a quieter, more intimate world, one that thrives in peristyles, atria, and private chambers, where the elite conduct a ritualized dance of desire, indulgence, and aesthetic performance. Here, the erotic is not merely pleasure, it is art, meditation, and an instrument of social, psychological, and political sophistication. The elite Roman villa is a carefully orchestrated environment, designed to accommodate both display and concealment. The atrium, open to the sky, allows light to illuminate mosaics and frescoes depicting mythological narratives rich with erotic symbolism. In these private yet performative spaces, homoerotic encounters unfold with precision and subtlety. A young companion reclines beside a patrician in the shaded peristyle, their conversation shifting between philosophy, poetry, and playful teasing. Every movement is deliberate, the tilt of a head, the extension of a hand, the casual brush of a shoulder. These gestures are both intimate and ritualized, a choreography that negotiates pleasure, consent, and the unspoken hierarchy inherent in age, status, and social positioning. Desire is not impulsive, it is cultivated, observed, and practiced as a refined art. Erotic rituals within elite households often intersect with literary and artistic appreciation. Frescoes, mosaics, and sculptures depicting youthful beauty, intimate embraces, or mythological lovers adorn the walls, creating a backdrop that both celebrates and instructs. The myth of Ganymede recurs, symbolizing divine favor, beauty, and desirable companionship, while depictions of Venus or Dionysian revelry evoke indulgence and aesthetic contemplation. These works are more than decoration, they are tools of education, sensual meditation, and social signaling. They instruct viewers on ideal forms of intimacy, permissible indulgence, and the boundaries of propriety, while simultaneously enhancing the emotional and erotic resonance of the spaces they inhabit. The rituals of erotic interaction themselves are layered with subtlety. Banquets, or convivium, are a prime example, merging nourishment, conversation, and intimacy. Reclining on couches arranged in a precise configuration, participants engage in verbal play, philosophical debate, and affectionate teasing, with erotic tension present but carefully moderated. The consumption of wine, music, and poetry serves both to lubricate conversation and to heighten awareness of the senses. In this environment, a glance, gesture, or whispered comment carries significance, a reminder that erotic engagement is always contextualized by social hierarchy and observation. Even the layout of the room, the placement of couches, the orientation of lamps, the proximity to mosaics depicting intimate mythological scenes, contributes to the choreography of desire. In bathhouses, these dynamics continue with heightened subtlety. While the public nature of the bath suggests communal exposure, the architecture often provides semi-private niches, alcoves, and elevated spaces where observation and discretion intersect. Patrons might engage in playful banter, the gentle brush of skin, or the sharing of philosophical discussion, blending intellectual stimulation with physical awareness. The baths are a microcosm of elite erotic life, spaces where the social, aesthetic, and erotic coalesce, where hierarchy is simultaneously visible and negotiable, and where ritualized gestures of touch and attention structure both intimacy and observation. Literature further illuminates the sophistication of these practices. Poets such as Martial, Ovid, and Catullus explore the interplay of eroticism, social commentary, and aesthetic refinement. In Ovid's Ars Amatoria, seduction is framed as a cultivated skill, attentiveness, observation, and artistry are as vital as passion itself. Martial's epigrams celebrate beauty while critiquing excess, highlighting the importance of subtlety and discretion in the negotiation of desire. The careful wording, playful double entendres, and layered metaphors found in these texts reflect the psychological and social nuances of erotic interaction. Pleasure is never entirely free or casual, it is always mediated by culture, observation, and the art of performance. Even the sensory environment of the elite household plays a critical role. Soft lighting from oil lamps or candles, delicate fragrances from oils and flowers, and the gentle strains of music or recitation create a multisensory backdrop for intimate engagement. Touch, sound, scent, and sight are orchestrated to heighten both emotional and erotic resonance, guiding the participant toward mindful and artful indulgence. In these carefully composed spaces, the erotic becomes a form of meditation, an awareness of self, of another, and of the cultural and aesthetic frameworks that shape desire. The presence of young companions, often under the guidance of older patrons, introduces another layer of ritualized sophistication. These relationships are simultaneously educational, aesthetic, and erotic. The older partner assumes the dual role of mentor and admirer, guiding intellectual, social, and physical refinement, while the younger demonstrates attentiveness, discretion, and responsiveness. Desire, in this context, is inseparable from instruction and social navigation. The young companion's beauty, wit, and adaptability are cultivated as forms of both personal expression and social capital. This delicate balance of power, affection, and erotic tension exemplifies the sophistication of elite Roman practices, highlighting the interplay of ethics, pleasure, and social strategy. Artistic representation amplifies these dynamics. Frescoes depict not only erotic embraces but also the performance of intimacy, reclining couples, intertwined gazes, and gestures laden with social and emotional nuance. Mosaics of Dionysian revelry and mythological narratives blend sensuality with ritual, suggesting that erotic pleasure was both celebrated and codified. Public statues, reliefs, and inscriptions further communicate ideals of beauty, elegance, and proper conduct, reinforcing the integration of desire into cultural, philosophical, and social frameworks. In these works, eroticism is elevated to an aesthetic, ethical, and pedagogical practice. It is observed, interpreted, and performed with conscious awareness of both social and personal consequences. Nocturnal rituals, conducted in privacy, reveal the depth of sophistication in these practices. Behind drawn curtains, in softly illuminated chambers, or beneath the foliage of carefully tended gardens, erotic encounters unfold with choreography and intention. Conversation, touch, gesture, and shared observation are orchestrated to create both pleasure and reflection. The participant inhabits multiple roles simultaneously: lover, student, observer, and strategist. Desire is not mere indulgence, it is meditation, art, and a means of cultivating intimacy, social understanding, and emotional intelligence. Each act, however subtle, carries weight. It is both personal and performative, private and socially informed. The risk of scandal remains a persistent undercurrent. Even in carefully managed circumstances, desire could be observed, judged, or interpreted, transforming intimacy into public commentary or political leverage. The accounts of historians, satirists, and poets reveal the delicate tension inherent in elite erotic culture. Pleasure exists alongside scrutiny, indulgence alongside social calculation, intimacy alongside reputation. Awareness of these dynamics heightens the psychological sophistication of participants, imbuing every interaction with layers of meaning, consequence, and subtle manipulation. By the first light of morning, illuminating the peristyles, atria, and gardens of Rome, the intricacy of elite erotic practice is unmistakable. Desire, art, and ritual are inseparable, intertwined with social hierarchy, aesthetic expression, and personal cultivation. The homoerotic relationships of the elite reflect both cultural ideals and individual agency. Beauty, wit, attentiveness, and skill are celebrated and leveraged, guided by subtle ethical awareness and social intelligence. Scandal, risk, and observation imbue these practices with tension, while the aesthetic and philosophical frameworks provide grounding, reflection, and mediation. In these private and semi-private spaces, one can observe the careful orchestration of experience, the deliberate arrangement of light, scent, music, conversation, and physical proximity, the attentive navigation of social hierarchy and desire, the mindful cultivation of intimacy, beauty, and influence. Elite Roman homoeroticism, in its ritual, artistic, and private manifestations, emerges as both art and strategy, meditation and indulgence, a sophisticated intersection of culture, desire, and human psychology. The lives of these privileged individuals illuminate the depth, subtlety, and slightly haunting resonance of a society in which eroticism was inseparable from social, intellectual, and aesthetic life. And as night deepens once more, the shadows of villas and gardens seem to hold their secrets with quiet dignity, whispering stories of intimacy, strategy, and aesthetic engagement. Each glance, each gesture, each carefully measured touch carries the resonance of centuries of cultural expectation and personal desire, leaving an almost hypnotic imprint upon the imagination. In contemplating these spaces, one senses the enduring artistry of human eroticism, deliberate, ritualized, socially mediated, and profoundly human, echoing through the quiet streets of ancient Rome and the minds of those who walked them. As twilight descends over Rome, the city assumes a quieter, almost conspiratorial air. The grand facades of the Forum, the glittering marble of palaces, and the shadowed corridors of elite villas seem to hold secrets in their silent arches. Behind these surfaces, desire moves deliberately, entwined with ambition, hierarchy, and the unspoken rules that govern intimacy. Among the elite, eroticism is both personal indulgence and a subtle instrument of influence. Every glance, gesture, or whispered word carries weight, capable of solidifying loyalty, inspiring devotion, or igniting scandal. One must first consider the nature of scandal itself in this context. Roman society, while highly stratified, thrived on observation and commentary. The behavior of elites, particularly in matters of erotic preference, was scrutinized in public discourse, poetry, satire, and historical record. A young companion, favored by a consul or senator, could inspire admiration or envy. An older patron's attentiveness could be interpreted as benevolence or as impropriety. Martial and Juvenal illustrate the precarious balance between private pleasure and public perception, their verses highlighting both the humor and the danger inherent in erotic visibility. Even subtle breaches of etiquette or taste could be amplified, transforming private desire into a tool of gossip, moral censure, or political maneuvering. Political influence, deeply entwined with erotic practice, manifests vividly in historical anecdotes. Senators and magistrates frequently relied on intimate companions not merely for companionship but for counsel, discretion, and social leverage. The presence of a young man, selected for intelligence, beauty, and attentiveness, could signal refinement, taste, and ethical awareness, projecting power subtly yet decisively. Conversely, alliances formed through erotic preference could consolidate political factions, reinforce loyalty, or provide a discreet conduit for negotiation. Desire, therefore, was never inert. It was a vector for social, political, and psychological influence, exercised with both pleasure and strategic calculation. The dance of influence and eroticism extends into the public and semi-public arenas. Banquets, symposia, and private gatherings of the elite function as stages upon which intimacy, status, and observation intersect. Participants recline in precisely arranged configurations, exchanging not only conversation and wine but subtle gestures of attention and preference. The composition of seating, the orientation toward artwork or light, and the timing of glances or touches are all carefully orchestrated. In this choreography, the erotic serves as both aesthetic experience and social communication, allowing desire to function as a subtle instrument of control, alliance building, and cultural signaling. Artistic patronage further amplifies these dynamics. The commissioning of frescoes, sculptures, and mosaics depicting homoerotic themes or mythological intimacy both reflects and shapes the sensibilities of elite circles. Mythological scenes, such as Ganymede's ascent, Dionysian revelry, or Venus and Adonis, provide models of beauty, affection, and acceptable erotic behavior, encoding desire within aesthetic, moral, and cultural frameworks. The careful placement of these works within private chambers, peristyles, and gardens ensures that eroticism is continuously observed, appreciated, and internalized, creating an immersive environment in which pleasure, contemplation, and social signaling converge. Desire, therefore, is not only enacted but also cultivated, framed, and memorialized through artistic engagement. Within these spaces, ritualized erotic behavior often follows precise patterns. Older patrons may guide younger companions through structured interactions, shared meals, the recitation of poetry, philosophical dialogue, and subtle physical gestures. Each act serves multiple purposes: education, aesthetic appreciation, personal pleasure, and the cultivation of social awareness. The choreography of intimacy, like the arrangement of couches, lamps, and decorative motifs, is designed to heighten emotional and erotic resonance while maintaining propriety and observation. Participants navigate a delicate balance between freedom and constraint, indulgence and decorum, creating a sophisticated system in which desire functions as both art and instrument. Scandal, however, is never far from these interactions. Historical accounts detail instances in which public exposure of erotic preference, or even rumor, could tarnish reputation, provoke moral outrage, or destabilize political influence. Emperor Nero, for example, is remembered not only for his political excesses but also for the scandal surrounding his erotic choices, which drew attention and criticism from both poets and historians. Such cases illustrate the precarious nature of visibility. Erotic favor can confer influence and admiration, yet exposure, misinterpretation, or envy can transform desire into liability. The awareness of this tension imbues all interactions with a subtle, almost hypnotic, intensity, heightening both pleasure and caution. In domestic spaces, this balance is further complicated by the interplay of intimacy and hierarchy. The younger companion, attentive, responsive, and aesthetically appealing, is positioned as both student and confidant, their behavior reflecting both personal taste and awareness of social expectation. The older patron's role encompasses guidance, protection, and subtle influence, requiring constant attunement to boundaries, perception, and propriety. Desire, in this context, is inseparable from social intelligence, erotic engagement is performed, observed, and interpreted within a lattice of hierarchy, aesthetic sensibility, and ethical expectation. The public sphere adds an additional layer of complexity. Banquets, theater attendance, and ceremonial events function simultaneously as arenas for social display, political alliance, and subtle erotic signaling. A patron's attentiveness to a companion may be noticed by peers, poets, and historians, reinforcing reputations or creating opportunities for critique. Erotic behavior is both deeply private and performatively public, navigating a continuum between concealment and visibility. The sophistication of elite Roman society lies in its ability to harmonize these domains. Desire is an instrument of private reflection, aesthetic cultivation, and social strategy, all mediated by observation and cultural expectation. Literary evidence captures these nuances in exquisite detail. Martial's epigrams often mix celebration with irony, praising beauty while highlighting the risks of exposure or excess. Juvenal satirizes indulgence and moral pretense, revealing the fragility of reputation when erotic behavior becomes visible. Ovid, in his guidance on seduction, emphasizes observation, strategy, and artful expression, reflecting an understanding of desire as both personal experience and social mechanism. These sources collectively reveal a culture intensely aware of the ethical, aesthetic, and political dimensions of eroticism, in which pleasure is inseparable from strategy, reflection, and social context. The architecture of elite villas and gardens itself participates in the orchestration of desire. Peristyles, secluded alcoves, latticed windows, and hidden passages facilitate intimacy while preserving discretion. The careful arrangement of light, scent, sound, and visual motifs enhances erotic engagement, guiding both perception and effect. Participants move through these spaces with awareness, negotiating touch, gaze, and proximity to maintain harmony between pleasure, propriety, and social awareness. Desire becomes choreography, a sequence of gestures, observations, and attentions, each calibrated to aesthetic, social, and ethical principles. Nocturnal rituals in particular exemplify the interplay of pleasure, discretion, and observation. Behind drawn curtains, beneath gentle lamplight, and amidst the fragrance of oils and flowers, erotic interaction unfolds with deliberate precision. Conversation, touch, and gesture are synchronized with reflection, aesthetic awareness, and social intelligence. Participants inhabit multiple roles simultaneously: lover, observer, student, and strategist. Every action resonates within a matrix of pleasure, hierarchy, and potential consequence. The erotic is both deeply personal and inherently social, a meditation, performance, and instrument of influence rolled into one. Historical scandals reveal the stakes inherent in these practices. Senators, generals, and even emperors could be brought low by accusations of inappropriate erotic conduct, exposing the delicate balance between desire and reputation. Public observation, rumor, and satire amplify the consequences of misstep, creating a constant tension between indulgence and discretion. Erotic behavior thus operates within a spectrum of visibility. It is celebrated in private, scrutinized in semi-public, and judged in historical record. The intertwining of pleasure and social risk creates a psychological sophistication that resonates through the literature, art, and architecture of the period. By midnight, the quiet chambers, gardens, and peristyles of Rome hold their secrets in the shadows. Every glance, gesture, and carefully measured touch reflects a culture of extraordinary subtlety, desire cultivated as art, indulgence mediated by observation, intimacy integrated with hierarchy and strategy. Erotic relationships among the elite are not casual, they are meticulously choreographed performances, requiring mindfulness, intelligence, and ethical awareness. The participant navigates pleasure, propriety, and perception simultaneously, reflecting the layered complexity of human eroticism and social navigation. Desire is aesthetic, intellectual, social, and psychological. Intimacy is ritualized, observed, and performed. Scandal, risk, and public scrutiny underscore the fragility of reputation, while artistic and architectural patronage elevate eroticism to a medium of cultural expression and personal reflection. The erotic currents of elite Roman life flow quietly, shaping relationships, influencing power, and leaving traces in poetry, art, and historical memory that persist across centuries. As dawn breaks once again, illuminating the marble halls, shaded gardens, and tranquil atria, the observer is left with an awareness of the intricate choreography of desire, pleasure intertwined with hierarchy, intimacy embedded in social intelligence, and erotic expression enmeshed with both aesthetic and ethical sophistication. Elite Roman eroticism is a meditation, a performance, and a subtle instrument of influence, a world in which scandal, observation, and desire converge in quiet, hypnotic patterns. In contemplating this, one feels the lingering echo of a society in which intimacy, art, and power were inseparable, whispering across time with fascination, caution, and a slightly eerie allure. As the centuries of Greece and Rome recede into history, the echoes of human desire remain, lingering in the marble halls, shadowed gardens, and quiet atria of an ancient world now gone. Homoeroticism, interwoven with pedagogy, aesthetics, and ritual, survives both in its practices and in the records left by poets, historians, and anonymous observers. To gaze upon these remnants is to peer into the complex psychology of a society in which pleasure, observation, scandal, and social negotiation were inseparably intertwined. The erotic currents that once coursed through classical civilization do not merely vanish, they leave traces in literature, art, architecture, and the very fabric of memory, carrying lessons on human behavior, cultural sophistication, and the intricate dance between desire and morality. From the earliest epochs of Greek civilization, homoerotic practices functioned as conduits of education, aesthetic refinement, and social hierarchy. The relationship between patron and companion, older and younger, teacher and pupil, blended intimacy with pedagogy, pleasure with instruction. This interplay of desire and mentorship provided a framework in which aesthetic, intellectual, and ethical cultivation coexisted. Within the shadows of private chambers, under the gaze of mentors, and amidst the whispered corridors of private villas, erotic experience was refined into an art form, delicate in its choreography, yet potent in its psychological and social influence. These early traditions established patterns that endured, subtly shaping Roman erotic culture and persisting through centuries of political, social, and religious transformation. The Roman embrace and adaptation of Greek models demonstrates the resilience and sophistication of homoerotic culture. Greek pedagogy, myth, and ritual were absorbed, modified, and reframed to align with Roman social and political priorities. The young companion remained a site of aesthetic and intellectual cultivation, yet hierarchy and strategic social awareness became increasingly prominent. Desire was not merely indulgence, it was an instrument of influence, a measure of cultural sophistication, and a reflection of personal and public morality. The careful choreography of intimacy, observation, and aesthetic reflection reveals a society profoundly attuned to the nuances of human interaction and the interplay between pleasure and consequence. Art, literature, and ritual served as repositories and conduits of erotic sophistication. Frescoes and mosaics depicted mythological narratives imbued with homoerotic symbolism, while poetry, letters, and philosophical reflections recorded the subtle strategies, emotional attunements, and aesthetic calculations that characterized erotic engagement. Private spaces, gardens, atria, bathhouses, functioned as arenas in which desire could be expressed with discretion, contemplation, and aesthetic sensibility. Each gesture, glance, and conversation was layered with meaning, balancing pleasure with hierarchy, observation, and ethical reflection. Through these practices, homoeroticism persisted across centuries, adapting to changing social and moral landscapes while preserving its fundamental sophistication. Scandal, ever a companion to desire, illuminates both the allure and the peril of erotic engagement. Historical accounts of emperors, senators, generals, and prominent citizens reveal the constant tension between pleasure, visibility, and social consequence. Exposure of intimate indulgence, whether through rumor, satire, or anecdotal observation, transformed private experience into public narrative. Erotic practice became simultaneously personal indulgence, aesthetic cultivation, and social performance. Participants navigated this landscape with psychological acuity, blending discretion, strategic awareness, and aesthetic sensibility to preserve both pleasure and reputation. The persistent presence of scandal underscores the precarious balance inherent in homoerotic life. Desire is simultaneously liberating and vulnerable, intimate and socially mediated. The late Roman world exemplifies the adaptability of erotic culture under moral, religious, and political pressure. Christian asceticism, legal scrutiny, and public expectation introduced constraints, yet desire found refuge in private ritual, artistic engagement, and careful choreography. Festivals, religious observances, and structured celebrations offered socially sanctioned avenues for expression, while private villas and secluded gardens allowed intimacy to flourish away from the watchful eye of society. Erotic engagement became an art of mediation, balancing the imperatives of moral prudence, aesthetic refinement, and psychological sophistication. Pleasure endured, transformed into meditation, strategy, and reflection upon human behavior and social hierarchies. Across centuries, the legacy of homoeroticism in classical culture reveals remarkable continuity and subtle transformation. Desire is simultaneously aesthetic, intellectual, social, and ethical. Scandal highlights risk and consequence, while art and literature preserve memory and instruction. The interplay of pleasure, observation, hierarchy, and reflection demonstrates a sophisticated understanding of human behavior that transcends mere indulgence. Classical homoeroticism embodies the synthesis of sensual experience, psychological acumen, and cultural cultivation. Its resonance persists not only in historical records but also in the enduring influence on aesthetics, literature, and conceptualizations of intimacy. The psychological complexity of these practices is especially striking. Participants navigate multiple dimensions of interaction: personal indulgence, social strategy, aesthetic appreciation, and ethical negotiation. The older patron exercises guidance, observation, and strategic influence, while the younger companion cultivates intellectual, social, and aesthetic sophistication. Intimacy is performed as art, experienced as meditation, and enacted as an instrument of social and political consequence. The choreography of desire, subtle and deliberate, exemplifies the enduring human capacity to harmonize pleasure, reflection, and ethical awareness within social life. Moreover, the cultural memory of homoeroticism preserves both refinement and tension. Anecdotes of scandal, satire, and historical narrative record the risks inherent in visibility and the psychological sophistication required to navigate social observation. Art, literary epigrams, and philosophical treatises preserve lessons on discretion, strategic engagement, and aesthetic awareness. Together, these records reveal the persistence of erotic culture not merely as indulgence but as a deeply integrated social, aesthetic, and psychological phenomenon. Desire is carefully orchestrated, continuously reflected upon, and artfully performed across the landscape of classical civilization. The ethical and aesthetic dimensions of homoeroticism intersect in striking ways. Pleasure is inseparable from reflection, the observation of hierarchy, the cultivation of beauty, and the awareness of social consequence are intrinsic to the experience. In private rituals, artistic engagement, and mentorship, erotic practice is simultaneously indulgent, meditative, and socially intelligent. Classical culture demonstrates that desire can be refined, disciplined, and profoundly sophisticated, offering insights into human psychology and cultural awareness that extend far beyond the immediacy of physical pleasure. In reflecting upon scandal, one observes that exposure and rumor amplify both the danger and allure of desire. Historical anecdotes reveal the delicate negotiation between secrecy and visibility, indulgence and consequence. The allure of erotic experience is inseparable from its social mediation. Pleasure is intensified by awareness of observation, and scandal serves as both warning and fascination. The classical imagination preserved these dynamics with remarkable subtlety, capturing the complexity of human behavior and the interplay between ethics, aesthetics, and desire. As the centuries wane and the cities fall quiet, the enduring legacy of homoeroticism becomes clear. Desire persists, transformed by social, moral, and religious pressures, yet it retains its fundamental sophistication. Artistic and literary records preserve the subtle choreography of intimacy, the strategic engagement of companions, and the psychological refinement of participants. Scandals illuminate risk, observation, and consequence, while ritual, private practice, and aesthetic cultivation preserve pleasure, reflection, and ethical awareness. Classical homoeroticism exemplifies the capacity of desire to adapt, endure, and influence culture across time. Pleasure, scandal, aesthetic cultivation, and social strategy coalesce to form an integrated erotic culture in which human behavior is both observed and performed with care. Participants cultivate beauty, intellect, discretion, and strategic awareness, engaging desire not as mere indulgence but as a meditative, artistic, and socially sophisticated practice. The classical legacy of homoeroticism thus embodies resilience, subtlety, and enduring cultural significance. In the quiet hours of night, the echoes of classical desire linger. Marble halls, gardens, atria, and bathhouses resonate with traces of centuries of intimacy, mentorship, scandal, and reflection. Desire flows through these spaces as both experience and memory, weaving a tapestry of erotic sophistication, social negotiation, and aesthetic refinement. Each anecdote, poem, and artwork preserves an instance of human engagement with pleasure, consequence, and cultural expectation, leaving a legacy that continues to inform contemporary reflection on intimacy, desire, and social dynamics. Though shaped by historical, social, and moral contexts, erotic practice consistently demonstrates the intricate negotiation between private indulgence, public consequence, and aesthetic refinement. The currents of homoeroticism illuminate the capacities of human beings to harmonize pleasure, reflection, and ethical awareness within social life, highlighting both continuity and transformation across centuries. As dawn approaches over the quiet cities of ancient Greece and Rome, the reflection upon these histories evokes a sense of continuity, subtlety, and enduring resonance. The interplay of desire, scandal, social negotiation, and aesthetic cultivation remains vivid, preserved through literature, art, and collective memory. Homoeroticism, in its many forms, demonstrates the resilience of human sensuality, the sophistication of aesthetic and social engagement, and the capacity for reflection and adaptation under moral, religious, and political constraints. It is simultaneously ephemeral and enduring, personal and performative, pleasurable and profoundly instructive. Even as the classical world recedes into memory, the sophistication of its erotic culture continues to inform reflections on desire, intimacy, and social life. Pleasure is inseparable from observation and consequence. Scandal illuminates both risk and human fascination. Mentorship, art, and ritual mediate experience with ethical and aesthetic awareness. Homoeroticism endures as a lens through which to understand human behavior, cultural sophistication, and the subtle interplay of private and public life, leaving a legacy that resonates across time, thought, and imagination. The twilight of Greece and Rome carries with it a delicate hush, a quiet in which the marble halls, peristyles, and shadowed gardens hold the memory of centuries of human desire. In these silent spaces, the traces of homoerotic culture persist, woven into literature, art, ritual, and anecdote. Desire, scandal, and aesthetic refinement flow together as an enduring current, shaping both private lives and public memory. To contemplate these echoes is to enter a realm where pleasure, observation, and reflection are inseparable, where the erotic becomes both art and meditation, and where the cultural legacy of intimacy persists beyond the immediacy of indulgence. Even as political systems crumble and cities are transformed, the principles that guided classical homoeroticism endure. Pleasure is inseparable from observation, intimacy is inseparable from hierarchy, desire is inseparable from aesthetic, ethical, and psychological sophistication. These threads, carefully preserved in poetry, epigram, and historical anecdote, reveal a society attuned to the subtleties of human interaction, the power of beauty, and the complex choreography of social engagement. The legacy of desire is not merely physical, it is cultural, reflective, and meditative. Throughout the classical world, homoerotic practice manifests as a convergence of instruction, mentorship, aesthetic cultivation, and strategic social engagement. The relationship between patron and companion, teacher and pupil, elder and youth, is simultaneously intimate and performative. Within these relationships, desire is exercised with mindfulness, gestures, glances, and conversation are choreographed to balance pleasure, social hierarchy, and reflection. Exposure, scandal, and public censure punctuate these practices, reminding participants that desire is both liberating and precarious. Every moment of intimacy carries psychological and social resonance. The interplay of scandal and desire is central to understanding the endurance of homoerotic culture. Stories of emperors, senators, poets, and private citizens who faced moral censure or public ridicule illuminate the stakes of erotic life. Rumor and satire transform private engagement into collective narrative, and yet these very narratives preserve memory, instruct reflection, and cultivate cultural sophistication. Scandal, paradoxically, ensures both the endurance and the visibility of desire, embedding it in literature, history, and art. The erotic is thus simultaneously ephemeral and enduring, private and socially mediated. Artistic expression becomes a repository for the continuity and subtle transformation of desire. Mosaics depicting mythological homoerotic scenes, frescoes of youthful beauty, and sculptural representations of intimacy preserve aesthetic principles and social practices. Private villas, secluded gardens, and bathhouses offer spaces where pleasure can be exercised with discretion, reflection, and artistic sensibility. The choreography of desire, the gaze, the gesture, the whispered word, is mediated by space, hierarchy, and ethical awareness. Homoeroticism becomes an art of perception, where pleasure and reflection converge. Late Roman society, faced with intensifying religious and moral pressures, demonstrates the adaptability of desire. Christian morality, legal scrutiny, and social expectation create new constraints, yet desire persists in private, ritualized, and mediated forms. Erotic engagement is exercised with subtlety. Festivals, religious observances, and communal celebrations provide structured outlets, while private chambers, gardens, and atria become sanctuaries of intimacy. Pleasure is intertwined with meditation, strategy, and aesthetic awareness. The erotic, in this late context, is both adaptive and enduring, resilient under moral and social pressure. The psychological sophistication of participants is striking. Patrons cultivate influence, aesthetic guidance, and strategic insight. Companions develop social intelligence, aesthetic appreciation, and emotional attunement. Desire is both experience and instrument, a personal indulgence, a cultural practice, and a medium of social negotiation. Historical anecdotes preserve this layered interaction, highlighting the subtlety, reflection, and enduring resonance of classical homoeroticism. Pleasure, scandal, and social negotiation are inseparable, forming a web of human engagement that continues to intrigue and inform. Literary reflection preserves not only erotic practice but its ethical and aesthetic dimensions. Epigrams, letters, and philosophical treatises offer guidance on discretion, observation, and cultivation of taste. Satire and anecdote illuminate risk, exposure, and consequence, teaching the careful negotiation of pleasure within social hierarchies. Desire is thus educative, aesthetic, and socially mediated. Classical homoeroticism is not a mere indulgence, it is a disciplined, reflective, and culturally significant practice, preserved across centuries through literature, art, and oral tradition. Even minor transgressions in behavior can provoke scandal, yet these very moments highlight the enduring fascination and potency of desire. The exposure of intimate preference, perceived impropriety, or moral transgression transforms erotic engagement into narrative, cultural memory, and reflection on social norms. Participants cultivate psychological and ethical sophistication to navigate this terrain, ensuring the continuity of pleasure, observation, and aesthetic refinement despite risk. Scandal becomes both cautionary tale and cultural instruction, preserving memory and reflection for future generations. The enduring legacy of classical homoeroticism resides not only in anecdote or artistic representation but in the reflective meditation it encourages. Desire, scandal, and aesthetic cultivation intertwine to offer insight into human behavior, social hierarchy, and ethical negotiation. Participants engage in sophisticated social choreography, balancing observation, reflection, and pleasure. Erotic experience is simultaneously intimate and performative, immediate and meditative. Across centuries, this legacy exemplifies the subtlety, resilience, and enduring resonance of human desire. Private mentorship and the cultivation of beauty remain central motifs. Patrons guide companions in aesthetic, intellectual, and social development, while companions navigate reflection, strategy, and observation. The erotic bond becomes a medium for cultural and psychological sophistication, integrating pleasure, ethical awareness, and social negotiation. Desire is exercised with care, reflection, and artistry, revealing a society attuned to both human potential and the nuanced choreography of interaction. The classical world demonstrates that intimacy can be refined, disciplined, and enduring, even under scrutiny and moral constraint. Historical narratives preserve cautionary examples alongside celebratory accounts, illustrating the enduring complexity of desire. Exposure transforms intimate practice into public narrative, amplifying both risk and fascination. Erotic culture is continuously negotiated within these pressures, balancing indulgence, observation, and ethical awareness. The classical imagination captures this intricate negotiation with remarkable subtlety, revealing the enduring sophistication of human erotic engagement. Art, literature, and ritual converge to sustain homoeroticism across centuries. Frescoes, mosaics, epigrams, letters, and philosophical treatises offer layered instruction on pleasure, reflection, and ethical awareness. Ritual and communal celebration provide socially mediated spaces for expression, while private practice allows discretion, reflection, and meditative engagement. Desire persists as an adaptive, sophisticated, and culturally embedded practice. The legacy of classical homoeroticism is simultaneously aesthetic, ethical, psychological, and social, offering insight into human experience across generations. The enduring resonance of these practices reflects a universal human engagement with desire. Pleasure, observation, reflection, and social negotiation remain central, whether in the private chamber, the ritualized festival, or the public forum. Scandal illuminates risk and consequence, art preserves aesthetic sophistication, and literature records reflection, teaching, and ethical awareness. Classical homoeroticism embodies the synthesis of human engagement, aesthetic cultivation, and social intelligence, leaving an enduring legacy in memory, literature, and cultural consciousness. As the cities of Greece and Rome fall quiet under the early morning light, the subtle currents of desire linger. Marble halls, gardens, peristyles, and bathhouses retain traces of centuries of intimacy, scandal, and reflection. Erotic practice, observed and performed with sophistication, continues to resonate through the enduring records of art, literature, and anecdote. The classical world preserves a remarkable understanding of the interplay between pleasure, observation, social hierarchy, and ethical awareness, providing insight into the depth, subtlety, and resilience of human desire. Even as the ancient world recedes, the lessons of its erotic culture remain. Desire is never merely indulgence, it is reflection, strategy, aesthetic practice, and social negotiation. Scandal illuminates consequence, art preserves beauty, and mentorship cultivates intellect and discretion. Homoeroticism, in its classical expression, exemplifies the capacity of human beings to harmonize pleasure, ethical awareness, and social sophistication. Its legacy endures, not merely in anecdote or artifact, but in the understanding of intimacy, reflection, and human behavior it offers across time. By the final hours of dawn, as the cities rest, the echoes of classical homoeroticism whisper still. Desire, scandal, reflection, and aesthetic cultivation form an intricate tapestry, preserved in memory, literature, and art. The meditative practice of intimacy, the careful choreography of pleasure, and the strategic awareness of participants testify to the sophistication, resilience, and enduring resonance of human erotic engagement. Classical homoeroticism remains both ephemeral and timeless, intimate and socially significant, pleasure and meditation entwined in a legacy that continues to inspire reflection across the centuries. Pleasure and reflection, observation and discretion, indulgence and cultural legacy coexist in a delicate balance. The stories of ancient Greece and Rome remind us that human desire is complex, adaptable, and enduring. Its currents continue to flow through literature, art, and collective memory, illuminating the subtle interplay of intimacy, ethics, and cultural sophistication that defines the human experience. Thus concludes the secret sex lives and homoerotic culture of the classical world. Desire, scandal, mentorship, art, and ritual converge in an enduring legacy, offering insight into the sophisticated, adaptive, and resilient nature of human intimacy. The echoes of this culture, preserved through centuries, continue to inspire reflection, understanding, and appreciation for the delicate choreography of pleasure, observation, and social engagement. In the end, the classical world whispers its lessons across time. Desire, in all its forms, is simultaneously ephemeral, enduring, intimate, reflective, and profoundly human.